Today's modern working professionals expect a learning experience that reflects the world we live in. Canvas LMS is built to help organizations unlock the potential of skills-based learning by focusing on what matters to learners and their educators. From dynamic course delivery to adaptable credentialing, Canvas empowers learners to thrive in a rapidly evolving landscape. See what it's all about at canvas.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of ATD Accidental Trainer Podcast. I'm your host, Alexandria Clapp, and today we have with us Tonya Wilson. Tonya is an organizational strategist and founder of AFC Consulting Group. Welcome, Tonya.
Thank you, Alexandria. I'm so glad to be here and delighted to be with you.
Yay, I'm so excited to chat with you as always. It's been a while, so I'm super excited that we got to catch up today, and especially to talk about ageless environments and what ageism is looking like in the workforce today, especially for older generations. We recorded recently with Chelsea Williams talking about younger generations. So I'm super excited to kind of revisit this topic and think about everyone in the workforce. So we'll jump into that in a little bit, but first, let's chat about you. We want to hear, how did you land in your role today? Tell us something accidental that maybe happened along the way.
Well, I'm glad that you asked about the accidental, and I'm certainly delighted for us to have caught up earlier. And when I think about the accidental portion of how I got to this place in organizational development and org psych, some of the work that we do, people think, oh, it must have been like super strategic, and you probably started with a passion for people, things, and HR and all of that. But can I just tell you that that's not my story? My story is that I started very early career, believe it or not, coming right out of university, very young, and I started in supply chain. And people say, supply chain, like what? Yeah, I started in the supply chain area. It was fascinating to me. I was with a large telecom. In fact, I was doing work with AT&T and some others, and I was in a management and leadership development program. You know what it is when you come out emerging leaders and you do the whole thing. And the space that I landed in was supply chain. And so it was fascinating, and I had a lot of success in it. I loved doing the work that I did. In fact, my husband and I, we have moved 8 times, and they were all corporate moves. We were successful in doing all of the things. But in supply chain, I found out I kept leaning into this people space. So I understood the operational. I grew up in Deming. I understand process. I negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts. It was all the things I got certified in. But I found that I really was intrigued by this training space. And I had a mentor, and I talked to him about it, and he was like, don't go there. Don't go there. Now, I'm going to tell you what he said. I don't want anyone to be offended by hearing this. He said, listen, let me tell you, when the economy shifts, that's one of the areas that gets impacted most significantly. So he had come out of that area into supply chain many, 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 many years before that. And he said, it's not my recommendation for you. Get the operational stuff, the financial stuff, get all of that, and then see where you land. So I took his advice, but the organization had lots of changes all over the country. And at that time, there weren't people who were doing a lot of work in the change management space, even though this is like, a Fortune 50 organization, actually probably Fortune 20 at that time, organization. And I'll tell you what, I started to be exposed to something called Who Moved My Cheese. That was accidental. I started to share it with organizations and teams, and they're like, oh, this is great. This is wonderful. It's helping us understand change management. And I learned more about change management. So then I ended up getting what they call a hobby job. That means I had a passion for something. I was doing the other work I did so well, getting the savings and all the stuff that were part of our KPIs. But they said, we'll pay for you to get certified in organizational development if you'll keep doing this other work on the side. That's not what you get paid for, but you're good at it and you love it. This is the accidental journey. All of a sudden, I find myself in a space where I'm now engaged in this training space? Well, that led to my passion for change management. And because of some of the other work, bringing it together, actually supply chain and organizational development have a lot of alignment in terms of the way that we engage with people and processes, looking at profitability and connecting strategy, and looking at how you take tools and information to create really high performing teams. And so I had an opportunity to do that and start getting into diversity and supply chain, supplier diversity programs, which, I had a privilege to revamp for AT&T and some other companies. And so that's how I landed in this space of an accidental trader.
I love it. I love that you're fascinated by change management and that even despite someone encouraging you to go a different direction, that you saw what my takeaway was is the biggest opportunity for impact to do that work is in this space. And I think that's empowering for L&D professionals, OD professionals, but sometimes you call yourself L&D and it's this hybrid bubble where you're doing some of the OD work. So that's really awesome to hear. And it's great that you have this change management expertise because I think that perspective will be helpful as we talk about ageism and what to do about it, and knowing that your recommendations are actionable. The way we talk about it, it's not, this is a really big problem and it sucks. I always want to make sure we're not just highlighting a doom and gloom story over here. But that being said, as I mentioned to you, I'm excited to talk about this topic just because it does feel really timely and it can feel really doom and gloom right now. There's a lot of reasons why, as we've chatted about, this may be happening, and or maybe it's my perception that ageism seems like it's flying off the handle. It's hotter and bigger than ever. And so I'm just excited to hear some of your recommendations and thoughts for why that is. But maybe we can start with a reality check. What are we getting wrong about older workers in today's workforce? And are there myths that need to go?
There are a number of things that must be considered in our current and today's workforce when we start to think about creating an ageless environment. You indicated that it seems like it's really a hot topic in terms of ageism, but one of the things that's interesting about ageism is that it is the single largest bias that is unaddressed of all the biases. It goes unaddressed because it becomes so acceptable as the norm to speak about it in certain ways, to make assumptions about people. And there are lots of myths that are associated with it. That's data not that Tonya has made up, but this is data that as we start to think about ageism, I know Tracy Gendron and also Dr. Rebecca Levy have been two people that I have really followed in terms of looking at ageism and what it means and the implications. But of course, because my area of focus is in the workplace, then I start to look at how do we make the application. So for instance, when we start to think about what we're getting wrong and some of the myths, one of the common myths is that older workers resist change and can't adapt. Well, okay, so this is an area that really piques my interest, right? Because part of the work that I do is helping people with change and transition. And when we consider a myth that says something like that, it's like, well, why is that actually true? It's not true. And in fact, there's research that indicates that, workers who are 50 plus adapt to new technology when they're given training in a way that they can use the training, they can embrace the training, they get the transfer of knowledge in a way that's acceptable to them. And PwC, in fact, right, PricewaterhouseCoopers has said that older workers receive digital training. When they do that, they adopt these tools at rates equal to their younger peers.
Mm.
I think that's fascinating and sometimes surprising to people. There's a myth that says older workers are less productive. But when we think about the National Bureau of Economic Research and the study that they found that older workers sometimes can outperform younger colleagues in 58% of productivity measures, right? In terms of problem solving and consistency and judgment. And these are some of the skills and competency sets that are necessary for anyone who is a part of an organization. Some people say, well, older workers, they lack ambition. They lack drive. They don't want to change. They don't want to do anything else. They just want to stay stuck. But the engagement actually increases. So I've got some data and some charts that were really interesting. I believe that it was AARP also that had some, but the Journal of Occupational Health also provided some information showing that older employees report higher levels of satisfaction and emotional regulation. This gets back to a conversation around resiliency and all of that. And this fuels their strong commitment to work. Well, what about the fact that they're too expensive to keep? I had a coaching client that was really trying to get some people promoted who they'd been there for years, and they were in the 50 to 60 range. She was getting a lot of pushback because people within her organization, and she was a senior level executive, right? She's a senior level executive. This is an IT firm where it's a great place to work. And they told her, we can't invest. They're expensive. And why should we invest that way? Let's promote and move the younger workers so that they'll be prepared for what's coming. Well, that's a challenge. So those are some of the things that we can say we're getting wrong. We're not investing in the reskilling, the upskilling, the looking at opportunities for succession in many areas.
I love that. I've been taking notes. Resistance to change, slow digital adoption, can't learn new technology, lacks ambition and drive, too expensive. All myths. You heard it here. I'm so excited that you are showcasing how maybe folks have it wrong, because you're pointing us to data that is in direct controversy or opposite to some of those myths. So in your recent TD article, you mentioned that age discrimination costs the US economy over $850 billion a year. Can you share a few ways that bias shows up in everyday workplace practices, and what's that impact for L&D leaders?
Yeah, I absolutely can. And, I want to say one of the things that's interesting to me about that number, 850, right? 850. When we think about that, that's staggering. But do you know that if we don't do something about it, it'll be in the trillions of dollars of impact over time? So let's talk about like how it shows up. And I like to go back, by the way, to the talent wheel, because this is the space, talent strategy, talent management. I connect people to strategy. I connect people to business strategy all the time. So I'm thinking about, what does this mean for the competitive advantage that organizations will need to have to compete in the market, to expand their market, to grow their market spaces, right? Well, what about hiring and recruiting? One of the things that we're doing is looking at our job descriptions in the way that we've often always looked at them, but we're using age-coded language. For instance, we may refer to digital natives or recent grads. We may use some terminology like that. We may say, in fact, that we need people who are going to be in a junior role or who only have this much experience. And if that's the case, or we may even say they must be tech savvy, which is, kind of a buzzword that we say. But these are this is age-coded language. And let's be realistic. In today's world, we're in the hiring and recruitment space, and we're using ATS, application tracking software. This is dangerous. And I know that's not a word we often use in talent management and talent development. But the reason I say that is because there are sometimes even billions of people that are impacted. Why do I say that? You may have heard of the recent suit that is associated with Workday. And so I'm not telling tales out of school. It's published all over the internet. You can find it. The recent research basically says that there's some algorithmic bias. Now, I've been looking at algorithmic bias for some years now because I love technology. And especially as we talk about creating learning experiences for high performance. love technology. There's some people who look at algorithmic bias to understand who's looking at the coding. So my background in IO psychology it forces me to take a look at what are the data sets, what does that look like, what was the analysis, who was a part of this. And when we think about that, I don't think it was intentional, nor do the courts. And this case is still being evaluated. So we don't know what the outcome is going to be. But what we do know is that there is an estimation that 1.1 billion people were impacted because of the far reach that Workday has in many places. Now, I'm a fan of the Workday product. In fact, I've led change management initiatives and organizations like healthcare organizations that were connected to McKesson or Change or some other places. And so I know it's a great product, but somewhere along the lines, someone didn't take the time to use the human element, perhaps, to understand, were there algorithmic biases? Who was looking at the data sets? Who were the sample populations? And what could have been there? The challenge is, intentional or not, people are harmed. It's kind of like when people say, oh, please always assume good intent. And I say, that's a great place to be. But even when we assume good intent, it doesn't mean that people don't get hurt and harmed in the process.
Yeah. Gosh, that makes me think of Joy Buolamwini.
Buolamwini.
Yes.
Buolamwini.
Yeah.
Joy Buolamwini. Yes.
Her work, it can be really frightening. And so it is really important to have that awareness of some of the implications when you don't realize that you're using these tools that have algorithmic bias. And gosh, the hiring process for anyone who is job searching seems like it's gotten worse in ways because folks are relying on these tools that are using AI. And so there's less humans involved and there's mistakes that are happening as a result. So I'm glad that you mentioned that because, of course, I mean, not only L&D should care about that, as you said, that's an impact for the entire business and talent strategy and business strategy competitiveness.
Thank you for mentioning Joy Buolamwini because I follow the work that she's done with the Algorithmic Justice League and have incorporated it into some of the other inclusion work. But it's not just there in the hiring spaces and the L&D space. When we look at the high potential programs, sometimes we're omitting older workers and not giving them the same opportunity because they're targeted toward those who are under 40, leaving kind of those professionals who are older and more experienced to be underinvested in. Even in performance management, I know that I love that I get the opportunity to engage in performance management as I do integrated talent management work. And evaluations that sometimes will say, oh, that person didn't have the energy or adaptability that they needed to really come into this place and show consistent value to the organization. And sometimes that comes with traits that they believe are associated with age, but not necessarily. Or if we think about succession planning and organizations that bypass the older employee in terms of the leadership pipeline. I've been a part of looking at talent review processes and looking at succession planning because it's all a part of creating the people strategy or people planning segment of what happens with the organization. That's necessary to further the business strategy. You got to look at the business outcome. What is the implication to the business outcome? And not just how people are treating each other. Is it nice? Is it fair? Yes, we want it to be fair, but we also know that there's an implication to our revenue stream, to our earnings before interest, tax, and depreciation and amortization, our EBITDA, to all of the things that are measurements for success in business.
I mentioned to you, I heard this quote recently from Jessica Krieger. She said, agility is the new stability. And you're giving a lot of examples here. Succession planning, which incorporates career path to a new role, high potential programs, which to me seem also to just indicate you're going to be transitioning into a new role. And it makes me think back to one of the myths that you mentioned, that older generations are resistant to change. And as I mentioned, as we were opening up the episode, to me, it seems like this is a hot topic right now that the shelf life of your skills is rapidly decreasing and getting shorter by the minute as AI and new technologies and economical conditions and all sorts of reasons, budget cuts are, are impacting our roles and asking us to really flex and change and do something new and maybe prove yourselves in a new way more often, more frequently, more than you're comfortable with. And I'm so curious for you to weigh in on that. What are your thoughts? And maybe we can unpack that myth a little bit. I know you mentioned some stats that go against that, but I think that's the one that feels even transcends whether or not you're an older generation. It just feels like that impacts everyone right now.
It absolutely does. And I will say, sometimes I think we lean into the labels a little too much. I know that Chelsea, by the way, also said the same thing in the podcast on Gen Z. And I'm so totally in agreement. Sometimes we lean into the labels a little too much because we don't always want to look at people as individuals,
Hmm.
uh, considering who they individually are and what their specific and personal preferences are. So when we talk about agility, there are lots of implications there. So I love the quote, agility is the new stability. I believe that we don't have a choice except to be agile. And of course, agile, right? As a way of doing business is something that people have become accustomed to over these past, I don't know, what, 5, 10 years or so. We talk about agile and all of that. But when we talk about individual behaviors, competencies and skill sets and all of the things that are necessary, the pace of change is unbelievable. In fact, Moore's law. So this is something I learned in my days of working with supply chain about Moore's law and the what happens as with the pace of change. I just recently heard someone in an interview say Moore's law no longer is applying. And this was actually someone who was being interviewed about a book that was written on AI. I think it was by Altman. And as we start to think about agility and the necessity, if we can't change, or we used to say, then you become a relic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so agility is a mindset. Before it is a skill set, it is a mindset.
Okay.
Before it is a new competency, it is a mindset. But people have to see themselves as engaging in a way to say, I'm open to the new and to the next. And I don't have to align myself with the bias that other people have. And as they think about me, I don't have to live that reality because that's not my truth. My truth is that I'm in this generation. I've seen a lot of things and I have a lot of experience and I love technology. My truth, I'm talking about Tonya's personal truth right now, is that I have embraced it in such a way that I keep telling the people on my team, I'm like, well, I'm so glad that I'm digitally fluent, but I'm on the pathway to becoming digitally fluid.
Mm-hmm.
That's the pathway, always learning, always engaging. The growth mindset is necessary. And when we create safe places where people are not afraid to make mistakes, psychological safety is so important in this space, where people are not afraid to make a mistake. If they can't find the right place to click and now they don't want to find anything, they want to shut it down because someone said, oh, it was just this, it was just that. Just click on that. I can do that in 10 minutes. Here, no, don't worry about it. I'll do it myself. And the message that sends to the worker or the person, our talent, who may not be as comfortable, is maybe I'm not as relevant, when their mindset is to change, but they don't know how. So this is where talent developers have such a wonderful opportunity. How do we create opportunities where we meet people where they are? And that's not just people who are older, because I know some people who are Gen Zers who are not as technology fluent, shall I
Mm-hmm.
say that, digitally fluent.
Yes.
How do we meet people? I have this thing. So I call this a Tanyaism.
Mm-hmm.
Meet them at their point of need, and then you'll be prepared to lead them to where they need to go. Whether they are neurodiverse, or whether they are working toward digital fluency.
I'm like taking literal notes on everything that you're saying. Amazing. You mentioned psychological safety. I love you mentioned that agility is a mindset before it is a competency, before it is a skill set. I want to talk about so now you're bringing in what talent development professionals can do. You can bring them to their point, meet them at their point of need, lead them to where they go. This sounds a lot like training opportunities. Now, my concern would be that people feel like they're being set up to fail. They're being pushed into, voluntold, sort of forced into, you sort of need to train for an upskill for this whole new thing. This is essentially a whole new career path for you because your old one is rapidly becoming defunct. I'm making up a scenario on the fly, inspired by your your messaging here. And I could see the creeping pessimism of I'm being set up to fail in a year. I don't know that I've ramped up to someone who's been studying this work all along and is younger than me. On some of the myths that you said before is less expensive, is faster than me at this work because they have this expertise and I am learning and I'm building the foundation for it right now. And they're going to decide they're going to let me go and hire someone younger and more digitally native. And just that seems like, if someone expressed that concern or how would you help? What do you say?
Yeah. So that's very definitely a change and transition management issue. When you ask me that question, it is how do we get people to buy into what the next and the new is and deal with the levels and areas of resistance that may be founded in reality?
Hmm. On both the
Because,
individual who has to grow and the
yes,
people around them who have to create that environment and wait for the growth to happen.
absolutely. The frustration that people on both sides have is around time, effort,
Hmm.
energy, and investment. And all of that is linked to commitment. What's the level of commitment that we all have to the success and the mission and the vision and the values of the organization and the outcomes that happen as a result of that organization? So, this is what I say to people when we're looking at, now we're talking about stakeholder populations, right? And when I start to think about populations, and not all workers 40 and over or 50 and over have the same needs. Some people are looking for different kinds of flexibility. Others are looking for upward mobility. Others are looking for horizontal. I mean, just so many differences as it is with every age. So then I always encourage people to ask 4 questions. What's going to be a win for me if I shift my mindset and embrace the change that's in front of me? What's going to be a loss for me? What are the things I am concerned about? Right. And then I ask leaders to ask the question, and who are the people that can be influential with them in this population? It will take additional effort, but so does every other change initiative. When a new ERP system is enterprise resource planning system is implemented, when AI applications are implemented, hopefully with different levels of governance, right? When anything in an organization is implemented, if we don't make the application of change principles, then we're going to have resistance and we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. And it's not going to be successful, right? So the same principles apply when we're talking to people who feel a little resistant on both sides. Is it worth it? So, I like to say this, is the juice worth the squeeze? The juice is worth the squeeze.
Yeah, I love that you're mentioning both sides because now I'm putting myself in the perspective of the individual who I have the mindset, I'll make sure to show wins. Let's say them out loud and get aligned with what the expectations are. Let's go. But meanwhile, there are people on the other side who are saying, nah, or maybe they've even encouraged it and then they're not convinced. So maybe it's holding them accountable when you're saying, what is the conversation that you're going to have with these folks who've suggested this change? And again, I'm thinking like maybe this is a short-term solution. It's for budget cuts, it's for whatever reason. And then later, if you've defined more explicitly what the expectations are,
Yeah.
then it's harder to say, we're not impressed, like harder to break down sort of that resistance or
Yeah.
change of heart. Well, I think what I'm describing is like a change of heart where you're, what is a nice way to say? I don't want to say getting screwed over by an organization, but they have
Yeah.
conflicting mindsets of your value that you're adding or these people are adding to their organization. And I think that goes to trust. And that's something that is relevant right now for folks.
Trust is a huge issue, and it's not linked to age at all,
Mm-mm.
right? If because one of the things that we're really careful, my colleague Yvette and I, as we were writing the articles and the blogs and delivering content, we were very careful to make sure that we address that at both ends of the spectrum relative to age you see bias, right? Can I trust that people will honor who I am and value me as a contributor no matter where? And that means, will they look at their systems and their processes? Will they influence the culture? It's very similar to when we say we want an innovative culture. Like it's one of our key values. Innovation is one of our key values. And yet they have a performance management system that dings a person every time they make a mistake. Well, that's not going to perpetuate innovation. It's going to shut people down and it will influence fear in the organization. Well, similarly, when we say we value workers of all ages, but when they see that the list of the people who were riffed were predominantly those in a certain age group, it sends a message. When they understand that they wanted to be a part of a leadership development program or some type of a developmental opportunity and experience, but the people who actually got the experiences were under 40, it sends a message that I can't trust them. So building trust has to be trustworthiness. And this is maybe one day we'll talk about the art of change. Trustworthiness is part of that. Building trust is essential to that. So if we're not willing to invest in that and take the time, then we're not going to get the outcomes that we're looking for. And so people will say, nah, why should I change?
You're making me think of something else that popped into my LinkedIn today. It was a post by Siri Shalazi, who was on the podcast earlier this year. And she talked about the hotel that she's staying in. Formal policy is that you don't have to make a reservation for a chair by the pool. But what the social norm actually indicated is that you kind of do because you go out there and all of the chairs are taken up by books and towels and things, but no one is there. And she said the way that the hotel could enforce that this is a real policy is coming up with some type of rule where abandoned chairs after 30 minutes, your stuff gets kicked out and it's open to anyone. And that you're describing this is what we say our culture is and this is what's important and meanwhile something else is happening is just a contradiction, right? That can send or breed mistrust, create these challenges that will lead to trouble with change, whether it is an initiative about creating an ageless environment or really anything. But this is so fun. I can see you smiling because you're just like you're like rolling your sleeves up like this is just a change thing. We got this. So we're in good hands with Tonya's advice. I wanted to like we could keep talking about a million things here, but I wanted to pick your brain about reverse mentorships or intergenerational teams. I almost feel like these sound like buzzwords of like, here's solutions that you can do. And they have a risk of going awry, like being more performative or just not done well or being perceived in a bad way. So, how do you get those right? Or how can you make those types of initiatives meaningful and creating more purpose and value than negative consequences?
Yeah. So, one, it's not forced. It's not forced. There's the opportunity for people to opt in to an experience, but being intentional about creating the opportunity. So one of my favorite movies around age and reverse mentoring is called The Intern. And it's a fabulous movie, right? That really shows how a person who was an older worker retired, but really was ready to shift into doing some of the things that he was very comfortable and very good at doing. Comes in and gets mentored, and a lot of things are different, but it shows the value of bringing him in. Well, I saw that and I immediately saw the application in the workplace, but I want to tell you, I have been a product of reverse mentoring. So I absolutely loved the opportunity. This was an educational experience, but as part of that, the opportunity to be reverse mentored. And the person that mentored me, I think he was probably 20 or 21 at the time. And I wanted, the question was, what do you want to be mentored in? So there's how do you opt in and how do you come into a place where it becomes more organic than forced? And I said, this is an area, almost like feed forward, right? This is an area that I want to know more about. It had to do with social media. And I'm still working on it. Honestly, I love technology, right? But being consistent with it is something I wanted to do a little bit more of. And so he started to mentor me in this space. And then I started to mentor him in the place of behavioral communications and learning a little bit more about that as he continued to progress in his career. It was a wonderful experience. What do organizations need to do? One, be intentional about creating the opportunities, talk about it, and find people who would want to pilot experiences, create intergenerational teams, and be very intentional about ensuring that the teams are intergenerational, because if not, we're missing the voices of very important people at the table who could create solutions that are going to make a huge difference in our ability to have the performance outcomes that we need. So, intentionality, be willing to measure the outcomes, determine what success looks like, and to track it over a period of time. Then use those same people as ambassadors for the experience that they've had. Let them share and bring others in. And this is sometimes there could even be an opportunity for, an ERG, right? Right? To come into a space where they talk about what is reverse mentoring and how can we do this. Now, our collaborative tools today, especially digitally and digital engagement in them, really offer so much opportunity for intergenerational engagement where people are learning from each other. So I think that there has to be intentionality. I strongly recommend it. I think it's a wonderful way for people to get to know each other, because let's face it, once we can get past, oh, you want to have a phone conversation, I want to text you. Okay, once we can get past some of that, we can find that at the heart of each person is a human who wants to be their best and give their best and make a difference at the end of the day and do meaningful work and be recognized, valued, appreciated, compensated well, and have opportunities. At the end of the day, we're all human.
I love that. Those are great recommendations to launching and leading some of those initiatives in a meaningful way. I want to squeeze a couple more questions in. Let's talk
Let's do
about
it.
retirement. It's loaded right now. What should L&D professionals know about engaging workers later in their careers, especially as we've chatted about folks who may not want to or be able to retire in the traditional sense?
Yeah. We know that not every employee who arrives at 62 or 65 will either want to or be able to retire as we know it. Right. I have a perspective on retirement that it's just transitioning to the next thing. Okay. But they won't they won't be able to do that. And when we think about that, when we think about like later career, how do we talk with later career employees about like what's your interest? We'll have those career conversations, but how do we have with early and mid-career, but what about later career? What's your interest? What would make a difference to you? What do you want to do? And the fear that people have is that there will be an assumption that I want to retire and leave. But that's not always true. So moving them beyond that fear is important. So creating a pathway, a career pathway. And I know you said L&D, but I really want to talk to talent managers about this. So L&D and talent management all together, right? The TDTM space, that maybe there's the opportunity to talk about what does it look like to create a flexible work environment and still achieve our goals and outcomes? What does it look like to help people who may not want the same level of demand in terms of moving, up to the next rung of the ladder, but have a tremendous amount of value? Or those who want to an encore career, they're ready, like they're so excited because some of the things that perhaps impacted them earlier on, whether that was family choices that they had to make or economic choices they have now, they have a new level of freedom and engagement. And they're like, come on, I feel like I'm 35. Let's do this thing right now.
You're getting sleep,
Okay.
no babies.
No, right. That's it. When things shift and seasons change, you have a new level of energy,
Mhm.
a new level of excitement about life and opportunity, as long as you're around people who are willing to make space for you.
It's make me just think back to earlier questions I had where we're talking about how you can change hiring practices and what you can do to help prepare hiring teams. You mentioned examples about the job descriptions, and age coded language, but taking some of these ideas and concepts into what that person's values are and what they're looking for. And when they're describing like, I have energy, I'm excited to have like a new career path, that it doesn't matter who the person is, what their age is. If they're showing you, I have the availability, I have sleep on my side, like then go for it. Give them the career path. I love it. Okay. So we're running out of time. Let's see. Let's close it out with something practical for folks who want to build an ageless workplace. Where can our audience start today to move in that direction?
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked that question. I mentioned earlier that moving around the entire talent wheel is really an essential place to start. So if we start with talent acquisition and we start to say, let me start to educate the hiring team on what kinds of biases are out there. That's a great start because sometimes there's just this not a level of awareness, consciousness around what's happening. Then implementing like hiring panels that are diverse hiring panels, not forced, right? Not forced, but giving an opportunity for people to have different perspectives. Certainly reviewing our job descriptions is necessary, and even auditing our AI driven hiring tools, focusing on skills and outcomes. All of that would be important when we think about leadership and career development. Reverse mentorship would be great. Project-based learning is another opportunity, promoting like cross-generational projects and career coaching with inclusive management training would be helpful. If we get into that L&D space, what happens when we start to look at micro-learning? I had this whole vision of what happens when we really create learning opportunities and experiences to meet everyone at their point of need. Yeah, and I'm going to post about this soon, but it really is about creating like almost like a vending machine. I go in and I put in what I need for who I am. And I put it in and I get it out, and then I contribute in an amazing way because I've had the opportunity. Encouraging technical training without it feeling forced, but in a way that people can get it. And understanding when we start to think about like recognition and rewards, having certainly policies from an HR perspective that create accountability with care, auditing salaries and looking at health benefits and looking at wellness. This is a huge issue when we start to think about wellness and what people believe the expectations are for older workers. And when we think about performance management and succession planning, what happens when we think about creating and conducting like age neutral talent assessments for talent reviews? or what happens when we start to look at creating a specific training for our management, like our management and leadership training and supervisory training, if we infuse into that and creating flexible transition plans for people so that it aligns with what they're looking for. So those are some of the practical places that we can go.
Just some. And I know that you have created lots of resources already. We're going to be sharing these in our show notes. You have a ATD blog, you have a TD magazine article, you have this video that you shared with me. There is more that I'm forgetting. There's a whole resources page on your website, and you have a community conversation coming up maybe sometime in the fall. You have lots and lots of resources. So make sure to keep your eyes on Tonya for more resources for ageless environments. For now, let's close out with chatting about your learning goals.
Oh, yes. Well, let me start with Duolingo is my friend. I have decided that I really want to be fluent in Spanish, and for many different reasons. But that's one of my goals. I've studied languages, I've studied languages in the past, and I read French fluently. But the Duolingo was like a thing. I was like, I'm gonna be fluent in Spanish so that I can be conversational. But beyond that, I have a passion for neuroscience and in the coaching, my coaching practice, and my practice is coaching, consulting, facilitation. It all comes together as an integrated package so often. I'm always including in behavioral communications and looking at the application of neuroscience. But let me just tell you, AI, oh yeah, we're all talking about it. And so I had the opportunity to complete a couple of AI certificates and as a part of an overall larger program. So I'm really looking at how to move that forward. I love this space of AI and how we can integrate just so many opportunities to become more efficient for sure, but to really access content and resources that we couldn't individually and on our own, and to use that to integrate that into design for learning. And I certainly am, I'm a big fan and use all the time the integration of the science of play. Everything that I do integrates the science of play for sustainable, ongoing learning, engagement, and hyper learning. So those are all of the places that I am investing my time in development.
Wow. You have a lot of learning goals ahead of you. We are excited to see how those play out into your work. Thank you so much, Tonya, for joining us today. It was wonderful to talk to you.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for helping so many people and for having me here. I look forward to future conversations with you and others who want to talk more about this.
Thank you to our sponsor, Canvas by Instructure.